My roommate's girlfriend, Sienna, has been living in our apartment rent-free for 3 months, and now they are telling me that I am the one who needs to leave. I've lived with Brock for over a year, and we've always split everything evenly. Our arrangement worked perfectly until Sienna started staying over 3 months ago. She never left. Now she's here every single night. Utility bills have skyrocketed by 40%. The electric bill alone jumped from $80 to $140. There's more cooking, longer showers, and the air conditioner runs constantly because Sienna works from home. Yet I'm still splitting everything 50-50 with Brock, which means I'm essentially subsidizing a third person. I've started to feel like a guest in my own home. I hinted at the problem before, but Brock always brushed me off. Now I'm at my breaking point. I can barely afford my share of the rent as it is. I finally decided a serious conversation was unavoidable. I gathered our utility bills, highlighting the drastic increases, and planned to talk to him. I waited for a moment when Sienna was at a yoga class, then sat Brock down at the kitchen table and laid everything out. "Look, we need to talk about Sienna living here," I began, keeping my voice as calm as possible. "She's been here every single day for 3 months. Our bills have gone up significantly, and I'm effectively paying for a third person." Brock actually looked guilty. "You're right," he admitted. "I didn't realize it was affecting you this much. That's not fair to you, man." "She needs to either start paying a third of everything," I continued, "or she needs to stay at her own place more often." Brock nodded slowly. "Yeah, I get it. Let me talk to her this weekend. We'll figure something out. Maybe she can contribute, or maybe she needs to be at her place more. I appreciate you being cool about this." For the next few days, I noticed Sienna wasn't around as much. She came by maybe 2 or 3 nights instead of every night. A huge wave of relief washed over me. It felt like the nightmare was finally resolving. Midweek, Brock even texted me. "Had a good conversation with Sienna. We're working on a solution. Thanks for being patient with us. Really appreciate it." He sent his half of the utilities on time via Venmo that month, even adding an extra $20 without me asking, like a peace offering. I stared at my phone thinking, thank God. We handled this like adults. For about a week, everything felt normal again, but it didn't last. Last Thursday, I came home from work around 6 in the evening. The moment I walked through the door, I knew something was wrong. Brock and Sienna were sitting at the kitchen table, their expressions grim. A third man, dressed in a full business suit with an open briefcase and documents spread across the table, sat with them. My stomach dropped before anyone even spoke. Brock's face was cold and expressionless, a stark contrast to the friendly roommate I'd spoken with just a week prior. "This is our attorney, Harrison," he said flatly, his voice like ice. Sienna sat with her arms crossed, refusing to look at me. "I'm sorry, what?" I stammered, feeling like I couldn't breathe properly. "An attorney, what's going on? I thought we worked this out." Harrison adjusted his glasses and spoke in a formal, detached tone. "I'll get straight to the point. Sienna has been residing at this address for over 60 days, which establishes legal tenancy in this state. She has full tenant rights under the law, but she doesn't pay rent." "She's not even on the lease," I protested, my voice rising with desperation. "Payment isn't required for tenancy establishment," Harrison continued calmly, as if reciting a memorized script. "Duration of stay is what matters legally. Once someone has lived somewhere continuously for 60 days, they're considered a legal tenant with all associated rights." He then slid a stack of papers across the table toward me. My own text messages were printed out and highlighted in bright yellow. The conversation where I told Brock that Sienna needed to pay or leave, and other texts where I'd complained about her constant presence. "We have documentation of your repeated harassment of our client," Harrison stated coldly. "Demanding she leave the premises, confrontational conversations creating a hostile living environment for a legal tenant." "Harassment?" My hands began to shake badly. "I was just asking for things to be fair. I'm paying half of everything while she lives here completely free." "You were demanding a legal tenant vacate without proper cause," he countered. "That constitutes harassment under tenant protection laws." He pushed an official-looking document stamped with a gold seal toward me. "You have 30 days to vacate these premises voluntarily. If you refuse, we will file for a formal eviction through the courts." "Eviction?" My voice cracked with emotion. "I'm on the lease. I pay my rent on time every single month." "Which is precisely why we're offering the voluntary option first," Harrison replied, utterly without emotion. "An eviction on your record will make it nearly impossible to rent anywhere else." I looked directly at Brock. "This is my home." Brock's voice was icy. "I'm the primary leaseholder. My name is first on the lease. I have full authority. We agreed." I felt tears starting to well up. "You said we'd figure it out together." Brock shrugged. "I said I'd handle it. I am." Had 30 days to leave my own apartment. I couldn't afford a lawyer. The sheer injustice of it left me reeling. I barely slept that night, sitting on my bed with my laptop open, typing roommate eviction laws and primary leaseholder rights into Google until my eyes burned. Every website I found discussed landlords evicting tenants, but nothing addressed a roommate trying to kick you out. I clicked through page after page of impenetrable legal jargon that didn't apply to my situation, my hands shaking so badly I had trouble typing. Reality kept hitting me in crushing waves. I might actually be homeless in 30 days. I had nowhere to go. My savings account held a meager $800, and first and last month's rent anywhere else would cost at least $3,000. My searches grew more frantic and desperate with each useless result. Around 2 in the morning, I found a tenant rights forum buried in the search results. A post from 3 years ago described a roommate dispute. I scrolled through the responses, and one comment made me stop breathing. A user named Tenant Advocate 2019 wrote that most lease modifications require all parties' signatures, not just the primary leaseholders. My heart pounded as I read the sentence again and again. Maybe Brock doesn't have the unilateral power he claims. Maybe Harrison was lying about everything. I immediately screenshot the comment and saved the entire forum thread in 3 different places on my phone and laptop. It was the first spark of hope I'd felt since Harrison had dropped those papers on the table. I spent another hour searching for information about dual signature lease requirements, but couldn't find anything definitive for my state. I finally passed out around 4 a.m. with my laptop still open. My alarm blared just 3 hours later for work. I felt like I'd been hit by a truck, my head throbbing and my eyes gritty. I called out sick because I genuinely couldn't function. My supervisor sounded annoyed but approved it. Spent the entire morning calling every free legal aid clinic in the city. The first one had a 6-week waitlist. The second said my income was slightly too high to qualify. The third didn't handle landlord-tenant disputes. The fourth was only taking domestic violence cases. By noon, I had called 17 different places, most with similar responses, booked solid income requirements I barely exceeded, or the wrong type of case. One paralegal at a clinic stayed on the phone with me for a few extra minutes. She sounded genuinely sympathetic as she told me, off the record, that tenant-on-tenant evictions are incredibly complicated, and I really needed a real attorney, not just legal aid. She gave me 3 names of lawyers who handle housing disputes. I called all 3 immediately. The first didn't return my voicemail. The second's assistant said they weren't taking new clients. The third was Craig Monahan. His assistant scheduled me for a consultation the next afternoon. The consultation fee alone was $200. I checked my bank account 3 times before confirming the appointment. I could barely afford it, but I couldn't afford not to try. I spent the rest of that day gathering every document I could find. My copy of the lease, every utility bill from the past 6 months, bank statements showing my rent payments, the papers Harrison gave me, and screenshots of my text conversations with Brock. I assembled everything into a folder, unable to stop checking and rechecking to ensure it was all there. Next day, I took a long lunch break and drove to Craig's downtown office. The building was imposing, and the waiting room, with its expensive-looking furniture and walls lined with legal books, made me feel completely out of place. Craig Monahan, a man in his 50s with graying hair and reading glasses, shook my hand and gestured for me to sit. I handed him the folder, and he spread the contents across his desk. I sat there, sweating through my shirt, as he reviewed everything. My entire future seemed to hang on whatever he was about to say. After what felt like an hour but was probably only 10 minutes, Craig's expression changed. He looked up at me with something resembling relief in his eyes. Tapping my lease with his finger, he delivered the good news. Your roommate can't evict you unilaterally because this lease requires both primary and secondary tenant signatures for any modifications or terminations. Brock would need your agreement or a court order based on legitimate cause. I almost cried right there in his office. The relief was so intense it made me dizzy. Then Craig continued, explaining the bad news. Even with a strong case, I needed to file a formal response to prevent Brock from pursuing an eviction through the courts. His retainer fee was $5,000 up front. My face fell before I could stop it. $5,000 might as well have been $50,000, given my financial situation. Craig saw my reaction and his voice softened. He suggested I could try filing the paperwork myself, but warned that one mistake could be catastrophic, as courts are extremely particular about formatting, deadlines, and legal language. Left his office with a stack of forms and instructions, feeling simultaneously hopeful and terrified. I had the legal standing to fight, but I was going up against Brock, who apparently had unlimited access to legal help through Harrison. 3 days after the attorney ambush, I came home from work and tried to connect to the Wi-Fi to continue researching my case. The password didn't work. After typing it in 3 more times, the chilling realization hit me. They had changed it. I found Brock in the kitchen. What happened to the Wi-Fi? I asked. He barely looked up from his phone. You're not a permanent resident anymore, he said with a shrug, his tone casual and cruel. So you're not entitled to household amenities. Deliberate sabotage took my breath away. I needed the internet to file my legal paperwork and research my case. Without a word, I grabbed my laptop and documents and drove to the public library, which was open until 8. Kind librarian saw me looking lost and asked if I needed help. When I explained I needed to file court documents online, she was incredibly patient. She helped me scan all my documents and guided me through the confusing court website portal. When I finally hit the submit button, I felt a small surge of empowerment. I had done something instead of just waiting to be thrown out. Minutes later, my phone buzzed with an email from the court clerk. A hearing date would be set within 30 days. The next morning at work, my supervisor, Melody, called me into her office. An HR representative was already there, and my stomach dropped. Melody's face was neutral as she informed me a complaint had been filed against me for stalking and harassing a former tenant of my apartment building. She cited evidence of threatening messages and unwanted contact, and stated I was being terminated immediately for violating company conduct policies. I tried to explain it was a mistake, that I didn't know what they were talking about, but Melody held up her hand to stop me. She slid a folder across the desk. Inside were printed screenshots of text messages, my phone number visible at the top of each one. The messages read, "You'll pay for this. I'm not letting this go, and you think you can just take what's mine." My hands shook as I read them. I had never sent any of these. "Someone faked these," I insisted. The HR representative asked if I recognized my phone number. I said yes, but reiterated that I didn't send those messages. Melody's face made it clear she didn't believe me. She said the company takes harassment seriously and can't risk keeping an employee who stalks and threatens people. And I asked who had filed the complaint. Melody cited privacy concerns and refused to tell me. The HR person started discussing my final paycheck and returning my building access card. Everything was moving too fast. Within 5 minutes, security was at the door. A guard I'd known for 2 years escorted me back to my desk while my colleagues stared. I shamefully packed my personal items, a coffee mug, a framed photo, some pens, into a small cardboard box. My coworker, Jake, watched from across the room but said nothing. The walk to the elevator under escort felt like an eternity. Sitting in my car in the nearly empty parking lot, the box on my lap, the pieces clicked into place. Sienna, this was her doing. She must have doctored those screenshots and reported me to my company. They weren't just trying to evict me anymore. They were systematically destroying my life, my income, my job history, my professional reputation. Started the car but had nowhere to go. I couldn't face the apartment. I drove to a coffee shop and sat in the parking lot, utterly lost. I needed Craig's help more than ever, but I had just lost my income. That evening, still unable to face going home, I sat in my car outside a different coffee shop and called my parents. My dad, Ashton, answered on the third ring. I tried to explain everything: the eviction threat, the fake attorney, losing my job over fabricated stalking accusations. My voice cracked repeatedly as I laid out the entire nightmare, expecting shock, concern, or at least sympathy. There was a long, heavy pause after I finished. Then my dad sighed and said something that made my stomach drop. "We've been talking to Brock." Cold dread washed over me. He explained that Brock had called them a few days prior, presenting himself as the reasonable one trying to handle a difficult roommate. Brock had told them I was harassing Sienna, refusing to accept that she lived there, and making everyone uncomfortable with my aggressive behavior. My dad said Brock seemed genuinely concerned. I tried to interrupt, to tell him it was all lies, but he kept talking. Then my mom, Deline, got on the phone. Her voice was laced with a disappointed tone that cut right through me. She said they had raised me better than to make a woman feel unsafe in her own home, and that I needed to accept that living situations change. I desperately tried to explain that Sienna didn't pay rent, that the eviction was a setup, that Harrison wasn't a real attorney. My mom cut me off before I could finish, saying Brock had shown them the threatening messages I had supposedly sent. They weren't going to support this kind of behavior, she said. Horrifying realization dawned on me. Brock had sent my parents the same fake screenshots that got me fired. My own family now believed I was the unstable villain, harassing an innocent couple. My dad got back on the line and said they wouldn't be providing any financial help until I got my priorities straight and apologized to those kids. The call ended, and I was left sitting alone in my car. My job was gone, my home was being stolen, and now my family had turned against me. Every support system I had was gone. I drove to the public library because I needed internet and couldn't go back to the apartment. Sitting at a computer terminal, I felt completely numb. The following week became an exercise in pure survival. I filed for unemployment online, but the website warned it could take weeks to process. When the form asked why I left my last job, I had to check the box for terminated, which likely meant my claim would be denied. At the grocery store, I bought the cheapest food I could find: ramen, peanut butter, bread, using a credit card that was already carrying a $1,500 balance. My checking account was almost empty. Back at the apartment, Brock and Sienna acted as if I were invisible. They would sit on the couch watching TV, not even glancing my way when I walked through. I started going through my belongings to see what I could sell. I listed my gaming console, my bike, and some old textbooks on Facebook Marketplace. A man offered me $200 for the console. I took it immediately, even though I had paid $400 because I needed the cash. Former coworker, Hank Gentry, who had left the company the previous year, saw my posts and messaged me on Facebook to ask if everything was okay. I broke down and told him the entire story over Messenger. Hank didn't question my truthfulness. He simply asked what I needed. He told me about a temp agency he worked with that placed people in short-term jobs, paid daily, and didn't scrutinize employment gaps. He sent me the contact information and told me to use his name as a reference. Called the agency the next morning and went in that afternoon. After some basic questions and paperwork, the coordinator said they could start placing me immediately. I began working whatever jobs they sent me to. One day loading boxes in a warehouse, the next stocking shelves overnight, another day doing data entry in an office. The work was exhausting, paying barely above minimum wage, maybe $12 an hour compared to the $22 I used to make. But it was cash flow when I had nothing else. I worked 12-hour shifts whenever possible, my body aching constantly. Would come home to the apartment and hear Brock and Sienna having loud conversations in the living room, clearly meant for me to hear through my bedroom door. They talked about when the place would finally be peaceful, and Sienna laughed about how nice it would be to have the second bedroom as an office. They were already planning how to use my room once I was gone. 2 weeks after losing my job, I came home from a grueling warehouse shift to find a man standing outside my apartment door. He asked if I was me, and when I confirmed, he handed me an envelope stated, "You've been served," and walked away. I tore open the envelope right there in the hallway. Inside was a petition for a restraining order from Brock. The paperwork alleged I had threatened violence against him and Sienna, citing the fake text messages as evidence. But it went further, inventing new claims I had never done, stating I had been behaving erratically and making verbal threats in the apartment. It claimed Brock feared for their safety. Court hearing was scheduled in just 1 week, where a judge would decide whether to grant a temporary order. I read through the papers 3 times, the legal language swimming biff. Or my eyes, the strategy became terrifyingly clear. If Brock got this restraining order, I would be legally banned from my own apartment. I wouldn't be able to go home, gather my documents, or even show up to contest the eviction at the hearing scheduled for 3 weeks from now. He was creating a legal crisis to force me out before I could even fight back. Standing in that hallway, I could hear Brock and Sienna talking and laughing inside. My credit card debt had ballooned past $8,000. The temp jobs paid barely enough for food. I had no family support and no real attorney. In 1 week, a judge might ban me from my own home. I folded the papers, my hands trembling, and shoved them into my pocket. The math of my life no longer worked. I couldn't bring myself to go inside. Instead, I walked down to my car, sat in the driver's seat, and pulled up Craig Monahan's number. The secretary answered, and I asked if I could come in the next morning. She checked the schedule and said, "Craig has 15 minutes at 9:00 a.m. I took it. The next morning, I was waiting outside Craig's office by 8:45, my hands refusing to be still. When he called me back, I sat across from his desk and laid out the devastating cascade of events since our last meeting. Losing my job over fake screenshots, my parents cutting me off after believing Brock's lies, and now the restraining order hearing in just 6 days. Leaning forward in my chair, I made a desperate plea. I would pay in installments, I promised. I'd sign over part of my future wages, agree to any payment plan, anything if he would just take my case. Craig closed the folder in front of him and slowly shook his head. He explained, not unkindly, that his firm's malpractice insurance required the full retainer up front. It was policy, not a personal choice. My face fell, the last of my hope draining away. Then he leaned back and gave me crucial advice for free. He told me to show up at the restraining order hearing with any evidence I could gather to prove the text messages were fabricated. Phone records, anything that contradicts their timeline, he said. Judges take restraining orders seriously, but they also don't like being manipulated with false evidence. I thanked him, clinging to this slender thread of a plan. At least I had a direction. I spent the rest of that day on the phone with my mobile carrier. I was transferred from customer service to technical support, then to the legal department, who told me I needed to submit a written request. I did so immediately through their website. Days later, an email arrived stating they could provide a log of calls and texts, showing numbers, dates, and times, but the actual content of the messages required a subpoena from a court or law enforcement. I called back, explaining I needed to prove I hadn't sent certain texts. The representative was sympathetic but firm. Without a subpoena, there was nothing they could do. When I asked how to get one, she said I would need a lawyer to request it from a judge. Spent another entire day on the phone, talking to 5 different representatives and being transferred to supervisors twice. Everyone gave me the same answer. Message content requires a subpoena. The basic log, which I printed out, would show I texted Brock's number on those dates, but it couldn't definitively prove the threatening screenshots were fake. It was something, but it felt flimsy, a shield made of paper against their lies. 3 days before the hearing, I finished an overnight stocking shift at a grocery store at 6:00 a.m. I drove back to the apartment but sat in my car in the parking lot, dreading going inside. Needing to feel productive, I pulled out the stack of documents I carried everywhere. The eviction notice, the restraining order petition, the old utility bills, my phone records. I spread them across the passenger seat and dashboard, my own pathetic arsenal. As I picked up one of the utility bills, something caught my eye. It looked off. I stared at it, and then I saw it. The bill was addressed to Sienna, but the address wasn't ours. It was for a completely different street across town, an apartment complex called Riverside Gardens. My heart began to hammer. I frantically sifted through the other scattered papers and found a credit card statement that must have gotten mixed in with my things. It was also addressed to Sienna at that same Southside address. Shaking hands, I pulled up the county property records website on my phone and typed in Sienna's full name. The results confirmed it. Her registered residence for tax purposes was the Riverside Gardens address, not our apartment. The address where she had supposedly been living for 3 months and established legal tenancy. I sat there staring at the screen as the entire fraudulent scheme unraveled in my mind. I opened a new browser tab and began feverishly searching tenant law websites. Every single one said the same thing: tenancy is. And just about staying somewhere for 60 days. It's about establishing that place as your primary residence, your main home where you live, receive mail, and pay bills. If someone maintains and pays rent at a different apartment the entire time, they never actually establish tenancy at the second place. They are just a guest. Harrison's entire legal argument was a lie. Sienna had never lived in our apartment as her primary residence. She had been a guest while keeping her real home across town. Spent the entire rest of that day and night submerged in research, reading legal websites in my car until noon the next day. I drove to the library, used their computers to print out relevant state statutes about tenant rights and primary residence definitions, and by 3:00 a.m. I had a folder full of documentation. I finally understood the full scope of their deception. Harrison hadn't just been wrong, he had deliberately lied, knowing Sienna maintained another residence. Hearing was at 9:00 a.m. I hadn't slept, but a sharp, clear focus had replaced the exhaustion. I put on my one decent, unwrinkled shirt and drove to the courthouse. The courtroom was small, with maybe 20 seats. Brock was already there, accompanied by a different man in a suit, a real attorney this time, not Harrison. I sat on the opposite side of the room, my folder of evidence clutched in my hands. When the judge called our case, we both stood. Brock's attorney presented his case first, holding up the printed, fabricated screenshots of the threatening messages I had supposedly sent. Then Brock took the stand, testifying with convincing sincerity about my erratic behavior and the fear he and Sienna lived with. When it was my turn, I walked to the front, my voice shaking at first but growing steadier as I began to speak. I presented the utility bill addressed to Sienna at the Riverside Gardens address, then the credit card statement, then the property records showing it as her registered residence. The judge looked up from his notes, his interest clearly piqued. He asked Brock's attorney to explain why Sienna had active accounts at a different address if she lived with us. The attorney, clearly unprepared for this line of questioning, shuffled his papers and stammered about Sienna, transitioning between residences. Interrupted, my voice firm. I pointed out that the dates on the utility bill proved she was paying for electricity and gas at the other apartment during the exact same months Harrison claimed she had established tenancy with us. You cannot establish tenancy somewhere while actively maintaining and paying for a completely different residence as your primary home, I stated. The judge turned to Brock's attorney. Do you have documentation proving Miss Sienna actually lived at the defendant's apartment as her primary residence during those 3 months? The attorney had to admit he did not. Judge didn't grant the restraining order, but he didn't dismiss it outright either. Instead, he continued the hearing for 2 weeks, ordering both parties to provide additional documentation proving where Sienna had actually lived during that time. He wanted utility records, lease agreements, mail receipts, anything concrete. I walked out of the courthouse feeling a surge of pure, unadulterated hope for the first time in weeks. I drove straight to the address on Sienna's utility bill. Riverside Gardens was a decent complex with a pool and a parking garage. I found the building number from her mail, and in the lobby, a mailbox directory clearly displayed Sienna's name next to apartment 2847. I took photos of everything with my phone, the building exterior, the directory, the apartment number on the door. I waited near the parking garage. Around 6 p.m., a woman in her 50s came out walking a dog. I approached her carefully and asked if she lived in the building. When she confirmed she'd been there 5 years, I showed her a photo of Sienna on my phone. She nodded immediately. That's the girl in 2847 who works from home, she said. I've seen her coming and going for months. My stomach twisted when she added that Sienna had recently complained about her boyfriend's annoying roommate who wouldn't leave them alone. I thanked her and took down her apartment number, a potential witness for later. For the next 2 days, I returned to the complex at different times. I saw Sienna's car in the parking garage twice and photographed it with the building visible in the background, the date and time stamp on the photo. I spoke to 2 more neighbors who confirmed she lived there, one mentioning he saw her almost every evening. On the 4th day, I went to the utility company offices in person. I filled out formal request forms for Sienna's account records at the Riverside Gardens address, paying a $50 expedited processing fee I could barely afford with my credit card. Within a week, thick envelopes arrived from the electric G. As in internet companies, every single document showed Sienna had maintained active, regularly used accounts at Riverside Gardens throughout the entire 3-month period she was supposedly establishing tenancy at my apartment. I gathered every piece of evidence, the utility bills, the neighbor statements, the photographs, the mail receipts, into a thick folder. My hands shook, but this time from adrenaline, not fear. I drove directly to Craig Monahan's office. The secretary recognized me and waved me back without making me wait. Craig looked up from his desk, likely expecting more bad news. I dropped the heavy folder on his desk. I found something big, I said. He opened it and began methodically examining each document. His entire demeanor shifted as he absorbed the evidence. The utility bills proving Sienna's active residence elsewhere, the photographs of her name on the mailbox, the neighbor's statements confirming her presence there. Craig leaned back in his chair and let out a low, impressed whistle. This isn't just a failed attempt to kick you out anymore, he said, his voice firm. This is fraud. Craig explained the situation with grim satisfaction. Harrison had stood in my kitchen presenting himself as a licensed attorney, making false claims about tenant law, and using fabricated evidence to threaten my illegal removal. Pretending to be a lawyer is a serious crime in this state, he said. Add in the fraud, the false evidence, the threats. We're looking at potential criminal charges. He asked if I still had Harrison's business card. I pulled it from my wallet where I'd kept it like a bitter trophy. Craig made a copy immediately. And he leaned forward, his voice turning serious and decisive. He said he would take my case on a contingency basis, getting paid from whatever we won. We were no longer just playing defense. We were going on the offensive against Brock, Sienna, and Harrison for conspiracy to commit fraud. He outlined a plan, an emergency motion to dismiss the eviction case based on fraud, a formal complaint to the state bar about Harrison, a police report, and then our own lawsuit for damages. He estimated we could be looking at tens of thousands in damages for lost wages, emotional distress, and legal costs. I could barely process it. An hour ago, I was drowning. Now I had a real lawyer who believed me and was ready to fight. Craig started working immediately, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He drafted a thick 15-page emergency motion to dismiss the eviction, attaching all my evidence. The utility bills, the neighbor statements, the photographs, everything that proved Sienna never lived with us as her main home. Simultaneously, he prepared a formal complaint to the state bar, including Harrison's business card and my statement about the kitchen table meeting. Watched him file everything electronically from his office. Each click of the mouse felt like a counterpunch, a long overdue fight back. He printed copies for my records, instructing 3 days after Craig filed the bar complaint, I received a call from an unknown number. A woman introduced herself as an investigator with the state bar. She informed me they had received my complaint and wanted to talk, revealing that Harrison had been on their radar before for practicing law without a license. My detailed evidence had triggered an immediate investigation. I took time off from my temp job and met her in her small, plain downtown office. She asked very specific questions. Did Harrison explicitly say he was an attorney? Did he present official-looking documents? Did he make legal threats? I answered yes to everything, describing the kitchen table meeting in detail. She took notes and recorded our conversation with my permission. He explained that impersonating an attorney is a criminal offense, not just an ethical violation, and she was gathering evidence to refer the case to the district attorney. Using fake legal power to threaten someone's housing is taken very seriously, she said, noting that housing is a protected area under state law. She thanked me and said I might need to testify if criminal charges were filed. I assured her I was absolutely willing. Days later, while I was stocking shelves at a warehouse job, my phone rang. It was Brock. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. His voice was completely different, no longer cold, but practically begging. He spoke rapidly, claiming Harrison had gotten the legal situation wrong and that he hadn't known Sienna needed to make our place her main home. He said Harrison was Sienna's cousin and had promised he knew what he was doing. While he rambled, I remembered Craig's offhand comment that my state is a one-party consent state for recording. I quickly opened my voice recorder app and hit record. Brock kept talking, desperate to work something out. I began asking calm, specific questions. Is Harrison actually a licensed law? Brock hesitated, then admitted, no. Did Sienna keep her apartment at Riverside Gardens the whole time? Another pause. Yes, he said, but she was planning to move in eventually. Was the eviction threat based on Harrison's understanding of the law? Yes, Brock confirmed. He told us the 60-day rule meant we could make you leave. Every answer was a confession. He was admitting he knew Harrison wasn't licensed and that Sienna lived elsewhere, destroying his own defense of being tricked. By the end of the 20-minute call, I had a recording of Brock handing me the entire case. Next morning, I played the recording for Craig. He listened, his eyes widening, and when it finished, he actually laughed. Brock just handed us the entire case on a recording, he said Jimmy to keep them safe and make digital backups. This is our evidence, he said. We can't lose it. Craig immediately made a copy of the audio file for our evidence folder. He then informed me we had a meeting scheduled with a detective from the fraud division. The bar investigator had referred our case to the police. We drove to the police station together. The detective, a middle-aged man with gray hair who looked tired but engaged, listened as Craig laid out the entire scheme, the fake lawyer, the illegal eviction threats, the fabricated evidence, and the discovery of Sienna's true residence. Then I played the recording of Brock's call. The detective listened intently, taking notes. When it was over, he asked for a copy. Craig handed him a USB drive containing the audio file and all our supporting evidence, the utility bills, Harrison's business card, the neighbor statements. The detective explained that using fraudulent legal threats to manipulate someone's housing was taken very seriously by his department. He said he would review everything and present it to the prosecutor's office, and while he couldn't promise specific charges, there was certainly enough for a criminal investigation. He asked if I was willing to cooperate fully. I told him without hesitation that I was. A continued restraining order hearing happened the next week. This time I walked into the courthouse with Craig by my side, a folder full of proof in my hand, and the damning recording on my phone. I felt completely different from the first time I stood there alone and terrified. Brock showed up with a new lawyer, a woman in an expensive suit who looked profoundly unhappy. The judge called the case, and Brock's lawyer immediately tried to withdraw the restraining order request. The judge refused, stating he wanted answers first, noting the court had been informed of the bar and criminal investigations. Craig stood and asked for permission to present evidence. With the judge's nod, he systematically dismantled their entire story. He presented the utility bills from Riverside Gardens. He played key sections of the recording where Brock admitted Harrison wasn't a lawyer and that Sienna had kept her apartment. He submitted the neighbor statements. He detailed the entire fraudulent scheme. Judge's face hardened as Craig spoke. When Brock's lawyer tried to claim her client was misled, the judge cut her off, stating the recording made it clear Brock was a knowing participant. He denied the restraining order completely and then made a scathing comment about wasting the court's time with fabricated claims, adding that he was referring the matter to the prosecutor's office as well. Brock looked pale as we left the courtroom. His lawyer wouldn't even meet his eye. The very next day, Craig filed our lawsuit. I sat in Craig's office as he finalized the 30-page lawsuit. We were suing Brock, Sienna, and Harrison together for everything they had done. The document laid out the entire story in devastating detail. Sienna's rent-free stay, my reasonable attempts to address it, the fake lawyer ambush, the fraudulent tenancy claims, the fabricated text messages that got me fired, the campaign to turn my parents against me, and the bogus restraining order meant to preempt my defense. Craig explained we were asking for $50,000 in total damages for pain and suffering, lost wages, legal costs, and punitive damages for their conspiracy to commit fraud. The important thing, he said, is getting everything on the record in a public legal filing. We're not hiding anymore. Craig filed the lawsuit electronically and had a process server deliver copies to Brock, Sienna, and Harrison. Now they officially knew they were being sued. Within a week, a process server handed me a thick envelope at my apartment. Inside was a settlement offer from Brock's lawyer. They wanted to settle the entire case before it reached the discovery phase, where both sides would have to hand over all evidence and answer questions under oath. The offer was for $15,000. In exchange, I had to agree to move out within 60 days and sign a non-disclosure agreement. I called Craig immediately. I read him the offer. We met in his office that afternoon. He had the offer printed on his desk. $15,000 isn't bad, he said, especially given your finances, but I think we can get much more if we push. The evidence is overwhelmingly in our favor. He advised we rejected and counteroffer. He also pointed out that making me move out was unacceptable and the silence clause was something we should fight. I trusted his judgment. I'm not covering up what they did, I told him, and I'm definitely not moving out. Craig nodded and began drafting our counter-demand right there. $50,000 in damages, Brock and Sienna would be the ones to move out. A written admission of their entire fraud scheme that I could show my parents and former employer, and absolutely no non-disclosure agreement. We were not negotiating for my silence. He emailed it to Brock's attorney that afternoon. I left his office feeling a powerful sense of agency for the first time in months. The following week brought developments that changed everything. Craig called me, his voice energized. The district attorney's office had filed criminal charges against Harrison for unauthorized practice of law and fraud. He was now facing actual prosecution. This put immense pressure on Brock and Sienna, who were connected to Harrison's crimes. Then, I got a call from Hank. He had heard through the grapevine that Sienna's employer had launched an internal investigation after discovering she had filed a false HR complaint against me. The investigation concluded quickly. Sienna was terminated for serious misconduct and ethics violations. The irony was stark. She had gotten me fired with fake evidence, and now she had lost her own job for the very same reason. 2 weeks before our court date, Craig called with news. Brock's attorney had sent a revised settlement offer. I drove to his office immediately to review it. New offer was for $45,000. They would provide written admissions of the entire fraud scheme that I could share with my parents and former employer. Brock would move out of the apartment within 45 days. The only condition was that I not speak to the media. Craig looked at me seriously. I think you should take this, he said. We've won everything that actually matters. The money is substantial, you get to clear your name, you keep your home, and the media restriction is standard. A trial is unpredictable. I thought about it for 5 minutes, the weight of the entire ordeal pressing down. I'll accept it, I said. Formal settlement documents arrived a week later. I read every page with Craig. The written admissions were detailed and unambiguous, confessing to every part of their scheme, Harrison's impersonation, the fabricated tenancy, the doctored text messages. I had the truth in their own attorney's writing. I made 5 notarized copies and stored them in different secure locations. No one would ever take this proof from me. I mailed a copy of the admissions to my parents via certified mail. 2 days later, my dad called, his voice thick with guilt. He apologized for not believing me. My mom got on the phone, crying, saying she was sorry for abandoning me. I didn't say it was okay because it wasn't, but I accepted their apology and agreed we could work on rebuilding trust. Next, Craig and I met with my former employer's HR. He presented the written admissions and threatened legal action for wrongful termination if they didn't correct my record. A week later, they called. My personnel file was amended to show I had resigned voluntarily, and they provided a neutral reference letter. The black mark was gone. 3 months after the attorney ambush that nearly destroyed my life, I'm still living in my apartment. Brock moved out weeks ago. The place is peaceful again, truly mine. I used the settlement money to pay down my debt and rebuild my savings. My family relationships are slowly healing. I learned that some people will exploit any weakness, but I also learned that fighting back is possible, even when you feel completely powerless. I won, more importantly, I survived and came out stronger.